The fire is dying. The children haven't eaten in 6 days, and the tribe's strongest hunters are staring at each other because they all know what has to happen next. This wasn't a rare night. For thousands of years, this exact moment repeated itself across the frozen world, and what ancient humans chose to do next is the darkest secret of human survival. Because when people imagine surviving an ice age, they imagine toughness, thick furs, roaring fires, brave hunters chasing mammoths across the snow. That's the version in the documentaries. It's comforting, and it's mostly wrong. The real story of surviving extreme cold isn't about strength. It's about the unbearable decisions strength could never solve. Decisions about who eats, who stays, and sometimes who doesn't make it to spring on purpose. Let's start with the coldest truth first: food. In the depths of an ice age winter, calories were not a lifestyle choice. They were the only currency that mattered. And when a tribe ran out, something anthropologists have documented across multiple ancient cultures had to happen: rationing by priority, not by fairness. The healthiest hunters ate first, not because anyone loved them more, but because a fed hunter could still bring back food. A starving elder, however skilled, could not. In extreme famine conditions, some Arctic and subarctic peoples practiced what researchers now call cenocide, the voluntary or arranged departure of the oldest members of the group when resources ran critically low. This wasn't murder in the way we understand it today. In many documented cases, it was the elder's own decision, an act of sacrifice, not violence. Among certain traditional Inuit groups, oral histories describe elders walking out into the snow alone during the harshest famines, choosing to remove themselves so the young could survive on what little food remained. Think about that for a moment. A grandmother, who spent her whole life keeping her family fed, deciding her final gift to them would be her own absence. It sounds unthinkable now, but under the specific math of Ice Age survival, it was often the only equation that worked. And it wasn't a single culture. Variations of this same brutal logic appear in oral histories from Siberia to the Arctic Circle to isolated mountain communities cut off by snow for months at a time. Different peoples, different languages, different centuries. The same terrible arithmetic arrived at independently, again and again. And it wasn't only the old who faced this brutal calculation. Some archaeological and ethnographic evidence suggests that in periods of extreme scarcity, difficult decisions extended even to infants, particularly when a mother's body could not physically sustain both herself and a newborn during a catastrophic famine. Historians and anthropologists studying these patterns emphasize something crucial. These were not acts of cruelty. They were the desperate outcomes of populations pushed to the absolute edge of biological survival, choices made only when every other option had already failed. This is the part modern audiences struggle with the most. We want ancient humans to be either noble survivors or savage brutes. The truth is colder than both. They were people making impossible decisions inside a world with no safety net at all. No hospitals, no stored grain, no neighboring town to ask for help. Just the tribe, the cold, and whatever food existed within walking distance. But cold didn't just force decisions about who lived. It forced decisions about how everyone lived together. Here's something that surprises most people. In the harshest Ice Age environments, personal space essentially did not exist. Entire families, sometimes entire extended clans, slept in a single pile of bodies inside cramped shelters because shared body heat was often the difference between waking up and freezing to death overnight. Some archaeological sites in Ice Age Europe show sleeping areas so small, so tightly packed, that researchers believe occupants slept in constant physical contact, limbs overlapping, children sandwiched between adults, the entire group functioning as one collective heat source. Privacy wasn't a value ancient humans lacked. It was a luxury the cold didn't allow. Shelters themselves reveal just how seriously this was taken. Excavations of Ice Age dwellings show walls built from mammoth bone, packed with dirt and hide, layered specifically to trap body heat inside a space barely large enough to lie down in. Every design choice was aimed at one single goal: keeping a cluster of human bodies warm enough to see the sunrise. Bigger wasn't better. Smaller, tighter, closer. That was survival architecture. And when the cold got even worse, some groups turned to something even more extreme. In several well-documented historical famine events, including Arctic expeditions and isolated Ice Age populations, pushed past the point of no return. Survival cannibalism has been recorded. Not as a common Ice Age practice, but as a last, desperate response, when literally every other food source had vanished and death was otherwise certain. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths in human history, and it's also one of the most misunderstood. It wasn't savagery. Forensic and historical analysis of these events consistently shows the same pattern. Only after every other possibility had been exhausted, and often accompanied by immense grief and ritual, did starving humans cross that final line to keep others alive. Even in these darkest moments, something distinctly human persisted. Survivors of documented historical famines often described elaborate mourning rituals, careful decisions about who among the already dead would be used, and overwhelming guilt that stayed with them for the rest of their lives. This wasn't the absence of humanity. In many ways, it was humanity under the most extreme pressure imaginable, still trying, even then, to hold on to some form of dignity. It reveals something unsettling about the species you belong to. Underneath civilization, underneath morality, underneath everything we call human nature, there is a raw survival calculus that never fully disappeared. It's just been buried under thousands of years of abundance. But here's where the story turns, because cold didn't only bring out humanity's darkest choices, it also built its deepest bonds. The same brutal winters that forced impossible sacrifices also forged the tightest social structures our species has ever known. Groups that shared food equally, that protected each other's children as their own, that built shelters strong enough for 6 or 8 or 10 people to survive a single storm together. Those groups outlived every one that didn't. Cooperation wasn't a nice idea in the Ice Age. It was a survival technology, every bit as important as fire or fur. And the tribes who mastered it are the reason any of us exist today. Some researchers even argue this is where the earliest roots of human morality began. Not in philosophy, not in religion, but in the freezing math of who needed to be protected for the whole group to make it through the night. Even the way ancient humans told stories around the fire served this same purpose. Warnings disguised as legends. Lessons about sharing disguised as myths about greed being punished. Every story was, in some way, survival information passed down in a form children would actually remember and repeat to their own children one day. Which brings us back to that dying fire. The tribe that made it through that 6-day famine didn't survive because one hero saved them. They survived because of 1,000 small, brutal, loving decisions. An elder who chose to walk into the snow, a mother who shared the last scrap of meat with a child that wasn't hers, a family who pressed their bodies together through a night that should have killed them all. None of it looks like the Ice Age we picture in movies. There's no glory in it, no triumphant music. Just cold, impossible choices made over and over again for thousands of years by people exactly like you. And maybe that's the most disturbing part of this whole story. Not that ancient humans did dark things to survive the cold, but that if you had been standing by that dying fire, starving, watching your children fade, you might have made the exact same choices they did. Because survival was never about being a hero. It was about doing whatever it took to see one more sunrise. And somewhere in your blood, buried under thousands of generations of comfort, that same brutal instinct is still there, waiting, quietly, for a winter it hopes it never has to face.